Have you ever felt scared to open up a dialogue around a current issue because you fear that it will become too divisive and drive polarization between your students? And maybe you worry about the harmful opinions that'll surface and the fact that you won't know how to handle them. Because of this fear, many of us have the very human instinct to prepare the perfect response in advance. But here's the thing. The key isn't about having the right comeback. It's about the container you create for the conversation. I think that very often people think that if we agree to facilitate a dialogue, then we have to hand over all the control of the conversation to the students. It feels like the fair thing to do. Otherwise, it isn't a real dialogue, right? Wrong. You not only have the right, you have the responsibility to invite students into a dialogue only after you've built a strong container for the learning. Inside that container, then you and your students can have real, grounded, intentional dialogue. But without that container, a dialogue is very likely to not be constructive or fair to anybody. In this video, I'm going to show you that the way you frame a conversation matters more than anything your students could possibly say during it. And strong conversational frames start with strong grounding questions. So I'll show you why that question is essential and how to craft one that turns even the most divisive issues into a dialogue worth having. But first, if you're new here, hi, my name is Maureen. I've been a dialogue facilitator for over 10 years. I've specialized in anti-oppression education and facilitating dialogue, especially around divisive issues. And now I'm really focusing on helping to capacitate educators who want to do that in their classroom as well. I always think about something that Adrienne Marie Brown said, which is that there is only one conversation that you can have with the people in this room at this time. So it's worth thinking through, okay, what do I want that conversation to be? How am I going to be sure that it's valuable and productive? How am I going to make it unique and different from any other conversation that my students are going to have around this topic?
To make my point, I need to tell you a quick story, but my baby's napping on me, so I'll be telling it to you like this. Let me show you something. I'm going to take you into my kitchen. All right, as you can see, it's a mess. I'm going to go quickly because this is kind of embarrassing, but it's in service of the point I need to make. My partner, bless his heart, does not like to live like this. In fact, he likes a tidy space. So you can imagine that living with me sucks. No, but in all seriousness, I think it is pointless. He's waking up. What I much prefer to do is just letting it get dirty all day, and then at night, I can put on a podcast or call a friend and clean the entire kitchen at that point. He does not see things that way, thinks that things should be cleaned as we go. A valid argument, sure, but not how I like to lead my life. So since I'm home at the moment most of the day, because of this dude, the apartment gets progressively dirtier throughout the day until about 20 minutes before he gets home, where I clean it all. We used to argue endlessly about who is right. Does it make sense to clean as you go, or does it make sense to clean once at the end of the day? Then we heard something on a podcast that changed the course of our relationship forever, for the better. It's this idea that when you're in an argument with somebody, if you want to find common ground, you need to reframe the argument and understand that it's not me against you, it's me and you against the problem. And if you and the person you are arguing with aren't aligned on that premise, then there's really no point in continuing to argue, right? I need to know that you care more about solving this problem with me than just being right. And this idea helps us reframe arguments all the time. Now, do we bicker and lose sight of this? Absolutely. But usually if the argument isn't going anywhere, one of us will come to our senses and say, hey, baby, remember, it's you and me against the problem, not you against me. So what is the problem here? Then starts the process of us defining the problem and then thinking through solutions together. So instead of who's right, the better question would be something like, what is a fair or efficient way to organize our kitchen so that it meets both of our needs? And that allows a whole bunch of better questions to emerge. Like, okay, If I don't want to spend too much time cleaning, what should I prioritize? This allowed him to tell me that it drives him nuts when the cupboards are open or when the plates are left out on the counter. However, if the plates are put in the sink and the counter space is clear, he doesn't really care if I don't do the dishes until nighttime. It also allowed me to explain that my focus is the best in the morning and in the early afternoon, and so I don't want to waste that really valuable time cleaning the kitchen. This is all to say that the way that a conversation is framed, meaning how are we defining the goal of that conversation, how will we know that it has been successful, is really important and has the power to entirely reshape what is discussed in a conversation. Okay, now back to my more professional setup.
So as facilitators, that same energy is the one that we want to bring to a group dialogue. It's not me against you. It's not student A against student B. It's all of us together against this problem. And that's why it's very important to establish a clear goal for the dialogue that you're having. People often say that the goal of dialogue is to understand each other better. And I said that for years also. I said, well, the point of debate is to win, the point of dialogue is to understand, and I kind of left it at that. But through a lot of trial and error, I've realized that that's not enough. And a lot of times when I felt that I've lost control of a dialogue or that the dialogue isn't as purposeful as I'd like it to be, it's because I haven't done a good job of creating the container for it and communicating the goal of the dialogue to the class so that we all share a purpose in being here. And you can fine-tune the goal of the dialogue with your students before you really get into it. But the point is that everyone should be clear about why the dialogue is happening and why we're asking each other to share things. We want to understand each other better, but in the service of what? What is our grounding question? Let me give you a real example that happened to me. So the subject that was brought up by numerous students during a class on sexism was the subject of trans women in sports. And I knew ahead of time that this was a subject that would very likely come up because it is in the news so much. And that is not a debate I'm willing to host in my classroom. And if you don't stop it and you let your students just run with this topic, then the dominant cultural framing around the issue is going to run the show. I really don't think that reproducing that debate in my classroom in a 45-minute period or whatever is going to actually shift the minds of students. I already know that if I don't get involved, I'm not going to see a dialogue unfurling, but I'm going to see the conversation devolving into a debate extremely quickly. So instead, I want to take the conversation and I want to reframe it. I want to come up with a container that can hold conversation about this issue, but in a way that is expansive and that allows for critical learning. And especially if I want to keep it dialogic, I'm going to root it in a value. This was the topic of my whole last video. So if you're curious, go check it out. I'll link it down below. But a value that both sides ostensibly care about is fairness or equality. So a grounding question for our dialogue could be, how do we make sports more fair? So the conversation isn't, is my way right or is your way right? It's, okay, let's find a way to work towards what we all want, which is the maximum amount of fairness for the most amount of people in sports. So it swiftly reframes the problem as something we're all trying to solve together. And from there, so much is possible. We can start out by sharing personal stories about why fairness matters to us. We can share stories about our personal experiences with fairness and inclusion in sports. And we can collectively explore different facets of this question. What material problems are standing in the way of fairness in professional sports right now? What other ways currently exist of dividing sports fairly? And do all sports need to be divided in the same way? In what ways have we seen that dividing sports by sex can be unfair? And finally, who benefits from framing this conversation only around trans people? Where else could we look? And how does framing the conversation this way keep us from looking there? And my hope in having a conversation like this isn't that it's going to settle this debate or that it's going to change one person's mind from one side of the issue to the other. It's that students are going to think more critically when they encounter this debate next. And that critical thinking might happen in a week or it might happen in 2 years from now on a different issue. I have no control over that, but I've raised questions that I think poke holes in a very simplistic binary narrative. And I've also given the students an opportunity to hear each other's experiences in a way that will hopefully open up their minds. So that's the power of a good grounding question, not only for your students, but also for yourself, because then it helps you come up with like the rest of the scaffolding of your dialogue, because all of your questions are tied together by this goal. When you define a goal with care, especially around a divisive issue, then you can change the entire focus of the conversation. You shift which conversations are valid, which conversations are going to have meaning if they show up, and which conversations are not valid or are not the topic of today's discussion. So that filter, which is the goal of your dialogue, is absolutely essential. So that's it for this video. I'd love to read your experiences with dialogue and with any of the themes that I talked about down in the comments below. Good luck out there if you're an educator. It is such a tough time. You're doing amazing, and I'm sending my solidarity to you.